The train station was always loud in the evening. Shoes tapped quickly against the hard floor. Suitcases rolled across the tiles. Announcements echoed from the speakers above, calling out departures and delays. People moved fast, eyes fixed on their phones, their thoughts focused on getting home. No one came to the station to slow down. No one came to notice strangers. In the middle of the large waiting hall stood an old public piano. It had been there for years. Its black paint was slightly scratched, and some of the keys were worn from use. A small sign beside it invited anyone to sit and play. Most days it was ignored. Sometimes a child would press a few random keys while a parent stood nearby. Sometimes a teenager would try to impress friends with a loud, fast tune. But most of the time, the piano sat quietly, like it was invisible. That evening felt no different. Crowds rushed past it without a second glance. A woman in a business suit walked by while speaking loudly into her phone. A delivery worker pushed a cart stacked with boxes. A young couple argued softly near the ticket machines. Everyone had somewhere to be. Then the main doors of the station opened again, and an older man stepped inside. He did not look special. His coat was simple and slightly faded. His shoes were clean but old. He carried no expensive bag, no sign of wealth, no bodyguards walking behind him. His hair was gray, brushed neatly back, and his face showed calm lines from age and experience. If anyone looked at him, they would think he was just another traveler. But no one really looked. He paused just inside the entrance and took a slow breath. The air smelled like coffee from a nearby stand and cold winter air that followed people in from outside. He stood still for a moment, watching the crowd move around him. His eyes were not rushed like the others. They were thoughtful. He had not been inside the station for many years. Long ago, when he was a small boy, he used to stand in this very place holding his mother's hand. She worked long hours every day, and sometimes she would bring him here after work while they waited for the late train home. They never had much money. Their clothes were simple. Their dinners were small. But she always found ways to make difficult days feel lighter. There used to be a different piano back then. It stood in another corner of the station. It was older, with chipped paint and uneven legs. The young boy would sit on the bench, his feet barely touching the ground, and press the keys gently while his mother watched. She always smiled when he played. Even if he made mistakes, she would clap softly and say it sounded beautiful. Music was the one thing that made him forget how hard life felt. Years passed. Life changed. The boy grew up. Struggles became bigger. After his mother passed away unexpectedly, the piano became too painful to touch. He stopped playing. He buried himself in work instead. He focused on building something powerful, something successful, something that would prove he had risen above the hardships of his childhood. And he did. Over time, he built companies. He made bold decisions. He took risks that others were too afraid to take. Slowly, the world began to notice him. His name appeared in newspapers and business magazines. People called him a genius. They called him unstoppable. His company grew into something worth billions. But success came with noise. Meetings, interviews, flashing cameras, constant phone calls. The louder his life became, the quieter his heart felt. He bought large homes but rarely enjoyed them. He traveled on private planes but never looked out the window. The small boy who once played piano in a train station seemed very far away. Until today. Today marked another year since his mother had left this world. No one in his company knew where he was. No assistant followed him. No security stood nearby. He had left all of that behind for a few hours. He began walking slowly through the station hall. People brushed past him without apology. A shoulder bumped lightly into his arm. Someone rushed in front of him to catch a train. He did not seem bothered. In fact, there was something peaceful about walking through a crowd that did not recognize him. No one expected anything from him here. His eyes finally rested on the public piano. It was not the same one from his childhood, but it stood in almost the same spot. For a moment he simply stared at it. The station lights reflected softly off its surface. A small child ran past it, laughing without even glancing at it. He felt something tighten gently in his chest. He remembered his mother's voice telling him, "When the world feels heavy, let your hands speak." He had not let his hands speak in years. Slowly, he walked toward the piano. A few people noticed him sit down but quickly looked away. To them, he was just an older man resting while waiting for a train. No one expected anything special. No one paused their busy evening. He adjusted the bench slightly. It made a quiet scraping sound against the floor. He placed both hands gently on his lap and looked down at the keys. Up close, he could see small marks and scratches from years of strangers playing different songs. Some keys were slightly more yellow than others. It was not perfect, but it was real. He lifted his hands and rested his fingers lightly on the keys. For a second, he hesitated. It had been so long. The station noise continued around him. An announcement echoed overhead. A train horn sounded faintly in the distance. People kept walking. Then he pressed the first key. The note was soft, almost too soft to hear over the noise. But it was clear. He pressed another, then another. His fingers moved slowly at first, unsure, like they were remembering something forgotten. The melody began gently, simple and quiet. It was not a fast song meant to impress. It was not loud. It felt careful, almost shy. A man standing nearby glanced over, curious but not yet interested. A woman waiting for her train shifted her weight and listened for a second before checking her phone again. The older man closed his eyes. With each note, memories returned. He saw a small apartment kitchen. He saw his mother washing dishes while humming softly. He saw himself practicing on an old upright piano with chipped white paint. He remembered the warmth of her hand on his shoulder. His fingers grew more confident. The melody became smoother, fuller, carried emotion that words could not describe. There was sadness in it, but also gratitude. There was longing, but also love. The sound began to rise above the station noise. A teenage boy who had been wearing headphones lowered them slightly. A worker pushing a cleaning cart slowed his steps. The businesswoman on the phone paused mid-sentence and turned her head. The music was no longer background noise. It flowed through the large hall like a quiet wave. Felt honest. Not perfect, not flashy, but deeply real. Each note seemed to tell a story of a life lived fully, of struggles faced silently, of victories that did not erase old wounds. The older man no longer noticed the crowd. He was not a tycoon in that moment. He was not a leader of companies. He was simply a son remembering his mother. His shoulders relaxed as he played. The tension he carried for years seemed to leave his body little by little. The busy world around him faded, replaced by the simple sound of piano keys under his fingers. A small circle of people had now gathered a few steps away, though he did not see them. They stood quietly, watching this ordinary-looking man create something extraordinary from an old public piano. And as the melody continued to grow, something in the air began to change. The station was still busy. Trains still arrived and departed. But in that small space around the piano, time felt slower. No one knew yet who he truly was. They only knew that the music felt like it came from a place deep inside the heart. And for the first time in many years, so did he. The music continued to flow through the station, soft but powerful. The older man did not open his eyes. He let his hands move freely, as if they already knew where to go. Each note felt like a memory rising to the surface after being hidden for years. A small crowd had formed around the piano now. People who had been rushing only minutes ago were standing still. Some stood with their arms crossed. Others held their bags close to their sides. A young child slowly sat down on the floor near the front, staring up at the man with wide eyes. The sound of the station was still there. The distant rumble of trains, the echo of announcements, but it no longer felt important. The music filled the space in a way that made everything else seem far away. As he played, his mind drifted back to the days when life was simple but hard. He remembered waking up early in a small apartment where the walls were thin and the windows let in cold air during winter. He remembered hearing his mother moving quietly in the kitchen before sunrise. She always tried not to wake him, but he would wake anyway. He would lie in bed and listen to the soft sound of dishes and the gentle hum of a tune she loved. They did not have much money. Sometimes the electricity would go out. Sometimes dinner was only bread and soup. But she never let him feel ashamed of their situation. She would smile and say, "We may not have everything, but we have enough." The piano at the community center became their small escape. It was old and slightly out of tune, but to him it sounded magical. He would practice for hours while she sat nearby after her long shifts. She looked tired most days, but when he played, her face would light up. "You play with your heart," she once told him. "That is more important than playing perfectly." Those words stayed with him for years. Back in the station, his fingers pressed a deeper chord. The sound vibrated through the hall. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth gently. The emotion in the melody was becoming stronger. He remembered the day everything changed. He was still young when his mother fell ill. At first, she brushed it off as exhaustion. She continued working, continued smiling, continued telling him not to worry. But her steps grew slower. Her voice grew softer. The doctor visits became more frequent. He tried to be brave. He tried to practice the piano the way she loved, hoping the music would make her better. But one evening, she did not come home. That night felt longer than any other night in his life. After she was gone, the apartment felt empty. The silence was heavy. The piano at the community center felt different too. He sat in front of it once more, but when he touched the keys, the sound made his chest ache. Every note reminded him of her. Every melody felt unfinished. So he stopped playing. Instead, he focused on surviving. He studied harder than ever. He worked part-time jobs after school. He learned quickly that the world did not slow down for anyone's pain. If he wanted a better life, he had to fight for it. Years passed. His determination turned into ambition. He started a small business with almost nothing. There were days when he thought it would fail. There were nights when he slept only a few hours, worried about debts and risks. But he kept pushing forward. He told himself he was doing it for her. He told himself she would be proud. Slowly, the small business grew. One opportunity led to another. Investors began to believe in him. Companies partnered with him. Newspapers wrote about his bold ideas. People admired his confidence. But success did not erase loneliness. The bigger his company became, the busier his schedule grew. Meetings replaced music. Contracts replaced quiet evenings. Applause at business conferences replaced the gentle clapping of one loving mother. He bought a grand piano for one of his homes years ago. It was expensive, polished, perfect. It stood near large windows that overlooked the city skyline. But he rarely touched it. Felt like decoration, not comfort. In the station, the melody shifted into something softer again. It felt like a conversation between past and present. The crowd had grown larger. People stood in a half-circle now. A security guard who had been watching from a distance stepped closer. Two teenagers who had been laughing loudly minutes ago were now silent. A man in a work uniform wiped his eyes quickly and looked down, hoping no one noticed. The older man finally opened his eyes slightly. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the keys. For the first time in years, he felt connected to something that was not business, not money, not reputation. He felt connected to the small boy he once was. He remembered how afraid he used to feel about the future. He remembered wondering if he would ever escape poverty. He remembered promising himself that one day he would make a life where he did not have to worry about bills or food. He had achieved all of that. Yet sitting at the public piano felt richer than any boardroom victory. Another chord echoed through the hall, stronger this time. The sound seemed to wrap around the people standing nearby. A train announcement interrupted briefly, but no one moved. A few travelers even missed their trains without realizing it. Among the crowd stood an older woman with gray hair. She watched him carefully. There was something about the way he played that felt familiar to her, though she could not explain why. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. The older man's hands moved with more confidence now. The melody grew fuller, telling a deeper story. It spoke of struggle but also of strength. Carried pain but also hope. He was no longer hiding from his memories. He was honoring them. For years, he believed that success meant moving forward without looking back. He believed that remembering too much would slow him down. But now he understood something different. Memories were not chains. They were roots, and roots gave strength. The final section of the melody began to rise slowly, building emotion in a way that made the air feel heavy. A young woman near the back of the crowd began to cry quietly. A father lifted his little daughter so she could see better. The child leaned her head against his shoulder, listening carefully. The older man felt tears in his own eyes, but he kept playing. He did not try to hide his emotions. He did not try to appear strong. In this moment, he allowed himself to feel everything. He thought about how his mother never got to see the success he built. She never saw the headlines, the interviews, the awards. But maybe he thought she would not have cared about those things anyway. Maybe she would have only asked one simple question, "Are you happy?" As the melody reached its highest point, the sound filled every corner of the station. It felt like a goodbye and a thank you at the same time. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He realized he had spent years proving himself to the world, but he had never truly healed the boy who lost his mother too soon. The music was not just for the crowd. It was for him. And as the notes continued to rise and fall under his steady hands, the busy train station became something else entirely. A place of shared feeling, where strangers stood together, connected by a story told without words. The last note of the song did not end quickly. It stayed in the air for a few long seconds, soft and trembling, before slowly fading away. His fingers remained on the keys even after the sound disappeared. He kept his head slightly lowered, as if he was still listening to something only he could hear. The station was completely silent. No announcements, no footsteps, no loud conversations. Even the usual echo of rolling suitcases seemed to have stopped. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath. Then, somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. The sound was gentle at first. One pair of hands. Then another. Within seconds, the silence broke into warm applause that filled the station. It was not wild or noisy. It was deep and sincere. People were not clapping because they were entertained. They were clapping because they felt something. The older man slowly lifted his hands from the piano. He looked up, surprised by the number of people standing around him. He had not realized how large the crowd had become. For a brief moment he looked almost shy. He gave a small nod, a quiet thank you without words. He did not stand up right away. Instead, he looked down at the keys again, gently touching one of them as if saying goodbye. In the crowd, faces showed different emotions. Some people were smiling through tears. Others were still wiping their eyes. A young man who had been in a hurry earlier now stood frozen, his train long forgotten. A woman who had been arguing on the phone had ended her call without even noticing. Near the front stood a middle-aged man in a simple jacket. He stared at the older man carefully. Something about his face seemed familiar. He pulled out his phone not to record, but to search. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. He looked up at the man at the piano again, then back at his phone. His eyes widened. He leaned toward the person next to him and whispered something. That person frowned in confusion at first, then grabbed the phone to look closer. Within seconds, whispers began to spread through the crowd. Is that really him? It can't be. Why would he be here alone? The older man began to stand up slowly, unaware that recognition was moving through the group like a wave. He adjusted his coat and stepped away from the bench. A young woman near the back suddenly gasped softly. She had just seen the same photo online. The face in the article matched the man standing in front of them. Only there, he wore an expensive suit and stood in front of tall glass buildings. Here, he looked like any other traveler. The whispers grew louder. That's the billionaire. The founder of that huge company. What is he doing here? The older man finally noticed the change in the crowd. The looks on their faces were different now. It was no longer just emotion from the music. It was shock. He understood immediately. For years, he had been photographed at events, conferences, and award ceremonies. He had seen his own face on magazine covers. Even without a suit, even without assistants around him, someone was bound to recognize him sooner or later. He gave a small, calm smile. A man stepped forward carefully, speaking in a respectful but slightly nervous voice. "Sir, is it really you?" The older man paused for a second. He could have denied it. He could have walked away quietly. But something about this moment felt honest. There was no reason to hide. "Yes," he said simply. The reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the air. A few people stepped closer. Some lifted their phones again, this time to record. Others just stared in disbelief. A billionaire, sitting at a public piano, alone. One young boy tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered loudly, "But he looks normal." The father nodded slowly. "He is normal." The older man heard that and smiled a little wider. A woman near the front asked softly, "Why are you here?" It was not an accusing question. It was curious, confused, almost protective, as if she wanted to understand why someone so powerful would choose to sit among strangers. He looked around the station, at the piano, at the people still standing quietly. "I used to come here when I was a child," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "My mother brought me here after work. There was a piano back then too." The crowd listened carefully. No one interrupted. "She loved hearing me play," he continued. "Today is a special day for me. I just wanted to remember." There was something in his voice that made the words heavier. Not dramatic, just real. An older woman in the crowd stepped forward slightly. "You played like you were speaking to someone." He nodded gently. "I was." The station felt quiet again, but this time it was different from before. It was not silence from surprise. It was silence from understanding. A man in a business suit asked, "With all your success, all your money, do you still miss those days?" The question could have sounded rude, but it didn't. It sounded honest. The older man thought for a moment before answering. "I don't miss the struggle," he said carefully, "but I miss the simplicity. I miss playing without thinking about anything else. I miss her smile." No one spoke after that. For years, the world had seen him as a symbol of power, a leader, a decision maker, a man who controlled thousands of employees and handled deals worth millions. But standing there in a simple coat, speaking softly about his mother, he did not look powerful. He looked human. A station employee carefully approached him. "Sir, we had no idea you would be here. If you had told us, we could have arranged something proper." He shook his head gently. "I didn't want anything proper. I just wanted to sit and play." There was something refreshing about that answer. In a world where everything about him was usually planned, scheduled, and organized, this moment had been completely unplanned. A young woman stepped closer, holding back tears. "Your music, it reminded me of my father," she said quietly. "He used to play for me when I was little." He looked at her kindly. "Then keep that memory close," he replied. "That's what makes life meaningful." Phones were now recording openly. Within minutes, clips of the performance began appearing online. Messages started spreading across social media. "Billionaire plays emotional song at train station. You won't believe who was just at the public piano." But the older man did not check his phone. He did not seem interested in how quickly the story was traveling. His focus remained on the people standing in front of him. A child slowly walked up to the piano bench and touched one of the keys softly. The sound rang out gently. The older man looked down at the child and asked, "Do you play?" The child shook his head shyly. "You should try," he said with a warm smile. "You don't have to be perfect. Just play what you feel." The father of the child looked at him with gratitude. In that moment, it did not matter how many companies he owned or how many awards he had received. What mattered was the simple advice he gave, the same advice his mother once gave him. The station announcements finally resumed. A train was arriving. Some people reluctantly began to move again. Life was calling them back. But something had changed. The older man stepped away from the piano fully now. The crowd slowly made space for him. Some people thanked him as they passed. Others simply nodded with respect. As he began walking toward the exit, The same man who first recognized him called out, "Sir!" He turned. "Thank you for reminding us what really matters." The older man paused, thinking about those words. What really mattered? Not the buildings with his company's name on them. Not the financial numbers. Not the applause at conferences. It was this. A simple piano. A shared memory. A room full of strangers feeling connected for a few quiet minutes. He gave one last nod and continued walking. Behind him, the public piano remained in the center of the station. But now it no longer looked invisible. A teenage girl slowly sat down on the bench, inspired by what she had just seen. She placed her fingers on the keys nervously and began playing a soft melody of her own. The station was moving again, trains arriving and departing, announcements echoing through the hall. But the feeling in the air lingered. And as the older man stepped outside into the cool evening air, he realized something simple and powerful. For the first time in many years, he did not feel like a tycoon. He felt like himself. The cool evening air touched his face as he stepped out of the station. The city lights were already glowing, and cars moved steadily along the street. For a moment, he simply stood there on the sidewalk, listening to the distant sounds of traffic. Inside the station, life had returned to normal. Trains were arriving. Announcements were echoing again. But something inside him had shifted in a quiet and powerful way. He had not planned for anyone to recognize him. He had not planned for the crowd. He had only wanted to sit at the piano and remember. Yet what happened inside that station felt bigger than a simple memory. Across the city, phones were lighting up. People who had recorded the performance were posting short videos online. The clips showed an older man in a simple coat playing an emotional melody on a public piano. Some videos captured the moment when the crowd began to cry. Others showed the surprise on people's faces when they realized who he was. Within an hour, the videos began to spread quickly. Comments appeared under the posts. "I can't believe this is real. He looks so different without a suit. This made me cry." Money didn't change his heart. Inside the station, a small group of people were still talking about what they had witnessed. The teenage girl who had sat down at the piano after him continued playing softly. She was not perfect, but she played with courage. A few strangers stayed to listen, smiling gently at her effort. The station employee who had spoken to him earlier was now on the phone with the supervisor, explaining what had happened. Even the security guard, who had seen many unusual things during his job, admitted quietly that he had never experienced something like that before. Meanwhile, the older man began walking slowly down the sidewalk. He had parked his car a few streets away on purpose. He wanted to walk alone without attention. His phone vibrated in his coat pocket. He did not check it at first. He already knew what it would be. Messages from assistants. Calls from company directors. News reporters trying to confirm if the video was real. He finally stopped under a streetlight and looked at the screen. Dozens of missed calls. Hundreds of messages. Headlines were already forming online. Billionaire plays emotional song at train station. Unexpected public piano performance moves crowd to tears. He let out a small breath. Not annoyed. Not excited. Just thoughtful. For years, he had carefully controlled his public image. Every appearance was planned. Every speech was reviewed. Every interview had clear goals. But tonight had been different. There had been no script. No cameras arranged in advance. No business purpose. It was just him and a piano. His phone rang again. This time it was his company's chief advisor. He answered. "Are you all right?" The voice on the other end asked quickly. "I'm fine," he replied calmly. "Do you realize what's happening online?" "Yes." There was a pause. "Should we release a statement? Clarify why you were there?" He looked up at the sky for a moment before answering. "There's nothing to clarify. I went to play the piano." Another pause. Then a softer voice. "People are saying it's the most human they've ever seen you." He thought about that sentence long after the call ended. The most human. Had he seemed less human before? He continued walking, thinking deeply. Success had built walls around him. Big offices. Private entrances. reserved spaces, security teams. These things were meant to protect him, but they also separated him from ordinary moments. Somewhere along the way, he had accepted that distance as necessary. But sitting at the public piano had broken that distance, even if only for a short time. The next morning, the story had grown even bigger. News channels were replaying the video. Social media pages were filled with clips of the performance. Comment sections were full of emotional reactions. Some people shared their own memories of loved ones who had passed away. Others wrote about how the video inspired them to reconnect with old dreams they had left behind. Inside his company headquarters, employees gathered in small groups, watching the video on their screens. Many of them had only known him as a serious leader, focused and direct. Seeing him play with such emotion surprised them. In a morning meeting, one executive asked carefully, "Was this planned as part of a campaign?" He shook his head. "No." Another executive smiled slightly. "It might be the most powerful message we've ever sent, and we didn't even plan it." He did not respond immediately. He was not interested in turning the moment into marketing. He did not want it to become another business strategy. To him, it had been personal. Later that day, he made a quiet decision. He called a meeting with a small group of trusted team members. When they sat down in the conference room, they expected to discuss numbers or expansion plans. Instead, he asked a simple question. How many public spaces in this country have free pianos? The team looked confused at first. They did not have that information. He continued, and how many community centers have music programs for children who cannot afford lessons? Now they understood that this was not just a random question. He listened carefully as they gathered data. Many programs had lost funding over the years. Some schools had removed music classes completely due to budget cuts. He leaned back in his chair and thought about the small boy he used to be, the one who found comfort in music when life felt heavy. Without that old community center piano, he might have grown up differently. Music had not made him rich. It had made him strong. "I want to start something," he said finally. Quietly, no big announcements at first. Just begin. He explained his idea, placing more public pianos in train stations, parks, hospitals, and community spaces, restoring old ones, supporting music teachers in underfunded areas, offering free lessons for children who showed interest but had no resources. The room was silent for a moment. One team member spoke gently. "Is this because of yesterday?" He nodded. "Yesterday reminded me of something important." The project moved forward quickly but without loud publicity. He insisted on keeping his name small in the beginning. The focus was not on him. It was on access, on opportunity, on giving others the same escape he once had. Meanwhile, back at the train station, something beautiful was happening. More people were stopping at the public piano. Some played confidently. Others played nervously. A small sign appeared beside it a few days later. It read, "Play what you feel." The teenage girl who had gathered courage after his performance returned again. This time she brought a friend. They laughed when they made mistakes. They tried again. An older man who had not touched a piano in decades sat down one afternoon and played a simple tune from his youth. A few strangers stopped to listen, just like they had the night before. The station, once only a place of rush and noise, had slowly become a place of small connection. As for the older man, he visited the station again one evening, quietly and without attention. He did not play this time. He simply stood at a distance and watched a young boy pressing the keys carefully while his mother stood beside him, smiling. The sight made his chest tighten in the best possible way. He did not need applause now. He did not need headlines. He had discovered something more valuable than recognition. He had rediscovered meaning. And as he turned to leave once again, blending into the ordinary crowd, he realized that true wealth was never about how much you owned. It was about how deeply you could feel, and how bravely you could share that feeling with the world. In the weeks that followed, the video from the station did not fade away like most viral moments do. Instead, it continued to travel from screen to screen, from one country to another. People who had never heard of his company now knew his face. not because of business success, but because of a simple piano performance filled with emotion. But inside his private office, life still moved forward as usual. Meetings filled the calendar. Reports waited on his desk. Decisions had to be made. Yet something about him felt different to those who worked closely with him. He was still focused, still sharp, still thoughtful in every discussion. But there was a softness in him now that had not been there before. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, a young employee hesitated before speaking. Normally, people in the room were careful with their words around him. His reputation as a strong and demanding leader was well known. But that day, the employee gathered courage. "Sir," the young employee began carefully, "after seeing the video, I just wanted to say thank you." The room became quiet. "For what?" he asked gently. "For reminding us that it's okay to feel," the employee replied. "Sometimes we get so caught up in targets and numbers that we forget why we're working so hard in the first place." The older man did not answer immediately. He looked around the room at the faces of people who had dedicated years of their lives to building something powerful alongside him. He realized something simple but important. They were not just employees. They were people with their own memories, their own losses, their own dreams. After the meeting ended, he remained seated alone for a few minutes. He thought about how often he had walked past others without truly seeing them, just like people had once walked past him in the station before he started playing. Success had trained him to move quickly, to think ahead, to plan for the future. But music had forced him to slow down. Later that evening, he visited one of the newly installed public pianos in a neighborhood park. The project had started quietly, but word was spreading. The pianos were simple but beautifully restored. Each one had a small metal plate with a short message. "For anyone who needs a moment." There was no large logo, no dramatic announcement, just a quiet gift to the community. When he arrived at the park, he saw a small group of children gathered around the piano. One child was pressing the keys with excitement, laughing at the different sounds. Another child tried to copy a melody from a song heard on the radio. Their parents stood nearby, smiling. He stayed at a distance, watching. A woman sitting on a nearby bench noticed him. She studied his face for a moment before recognition slowly appeared. "You're the one from the station," she said softly. He nodded. She looked toward the children. "My son asked for piano lessons after watching your video," she said. "We couldn't afford them before, but now he practices here every week." He followed her gaze. The child at the piano looked focused, determined to press the right notes. "That makes me happy," he replied honestly. The woman hesitated before asking another question. "You have everything a person could want. Why does something like this matter so much to you?" He smiled gently. "Because when I was young, I didn't have everything. But I had music. And that changed my life." She seemed to understand without needing more explanation. As he walked away from the park, he thought about how strange life could be. Years ago, he had believed that building a powerful company would fill every empty space inside him. He believed success would silence pain. But pain does not disappear because of money. It waits quietly, and sometimes it needs to be faced, not avoided. One evening, he received a letter at his office. It was handwritten, simple and slightly uneven. The envelope had no return address. Inside was a short message. It was from the teenage girl who had played after him at the station. She wrote about how she had always been too shy to perform in public. She loved music but was afraid of making mistakes. Watching him sit down without fear, without pride, gave her courage. She wrote that she had since joined a small music group at school and even performed in front of her classmates. At the end of the letter, she wrote one sentence that stayed with him. "You didn't just play the piano. You gave us permission to try." He read that line more than once. Permission to try. He had spent most of his life proving himself, pushing himself, demanding more from himself. But he had rarely given himself permission. Permission to grieve, permission to remember, permission to be imperfect. That night, instead of staying late at the office, he went home earlier than usual. He walked into the large living room where the expensive grand piano stood near the window. It had been polished regularly but barely used. He sat down in front of it slowly. The city skyline glowed outside. Lights flickered in tall buildings. Cars moved like tiny streams of red and white below. He placed his hands on the keys. The first note echoed through the quiet room. It sounded different from the public piano. Richer, clearer, but the feeling was the same. This time he did not play for an audience. He did not play for memory alone. He played because he wanted to. As the melody filled the room, he realized that something inside him was healing little by little. The next morning, he made another decision. He arranged to visit one of the community centers that had recently received funding for music classes. There were no reporters invited. No big stage. Just a simple visit. When he entered the center, children were sitting in a small classroom with basic keyboards placed on folding tables. A young instructor was guiding them through simple exercises. The children looked up, curious. He did not introduce himself with titles. He simply said, "I heard you are learning music." One child raised a hand and asked, "Are you really the man from the video?" He smiled. "Yes." The room filled with whispers and small smiles. "Can you show us something?" Another child asked boldly. He looked at the instructor for permission. The instructor nodded with excitement. He sat down at one of the simple keyboards. It was smaller and lighter than the pianos he was used to, but it did not matter. He played a short, simple melody, one that was easy enough for the children to follow. Then he stopped and said, "Now you try." The children laughed nervously but began pressing keys. Some hit the wrong notes. Some hesitated, but they tried. He watched them carefully. In their eyes, he saw the same spark he once had, the spark that appears when someone discovers a way to express feelings without speaking. Before leaving, he told them something his mother once told him. "You don't have to be perfect. Just play what you feel." As he walked out of the community center, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had built towers of glass and steel. He had signed contracts worth more than he could have imagined as a child. But standing in that small classroom, listening to imperfect but joyful music, felt more meaningful than any deal. The world still saw him as a tycoon, a billionaire, a leader of industry. But slowly, quietly, he was becoming something else too. A reminder that behind every title is a human story. Behind every success is a memory. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is sit down at an old piano and let their heart speak. Months passed, but the night at the train station never truly faded from people's minds. The video was still shared from time to time, especially on days when someone needed a reminder that kindness and emotion still existed in busy cities. But for him, life was no longer about that one moment. It had become about what came after. The quiet project he started began to grow in ways he had not expected. Public pianos appeared in places that had once felt cold and rushed. Inside hospitals, near parks, in small town squares, at bus terminals, and even in shopping centers. Each one carried the same small message. For anyone who needs a moment. No large logo. No dramatic branding. Just an open invitation. At first, people were unsure. They would walk past the pianos the same way they used to walk past the one in the station. But slowly, someone would sit down. Then another. Then children began asking their parents if they could try. In one hospital waiting area, a young nurse started playing soft melodies during long night shifts. Families waiting for news about loved ones would sit quietly and listen. In a small town square, an elderly man played songs from his youth while teenagers gathered around, curious about music from another time. In a busy shopping center, two strangers who had never met before ended up playing a duet, laughing when they missed notes. None of these people knew him personally. Some did not even know he was behind the project. And that was exactly how he wanted it. One afternoon, he returned once again to the original train station. This time, he wore the same simple coat. No cameras followed him. The crowd did not recognize him immediately because they were focused on something else. A young boy was sitting at the piano concentrating deeply. His feet did not reach the floor, just like his own feet had once hovered above the pedals years ago. Beside him stood his mother, watching with patient eyes. The boy struggled with a part of the melody and stopped, frustrated. "It's okay," his mother said gently. "Try again." The words hit him softly. They sounded so familiar. The boy tried again. This time he played the section slowly. It was not perfect, but he made it through. His mother clapped quietly, proud of his effort. The older man stood there for a long moment, unnoticed, just watching. He felt something warm rise inside his chest. Not sadness, not even nostalgia. It was gratitude. He realized that this was how change truly happened, not through headlines or applause, but through small, repeated moments of encouragement. As he turned to leave, someone finally recognized him. A young man approached carefully. "Are you going to play again?" the young man asked. He looked back at the piano and smiled. "Not today," he replied. "Today is his turn." The young man nodded with understanding. Later that week, he held a small private gathering at his company headquarters. It was not a business event. It was something different. Employees from every department were invited, from executives to maintenance staff. Many were surprised by the invitation. In the center of the large hall, a simple piano had been placed. When everyone had gathered, he stepped forward, not behind a podium, but beside the piano. "I've spent most of my life building this company," he began in a calm voice, "and I'm proud of what we've created together. But recently, I was reminded that success means very little if we forget who we are outside these walls." The room was silent. "We are not just workers. We are sons, daughters, parents, friends. We all carry stories. We all carry memories. And sometimes, we need a space to express them." He gestured toward the piano. "Today, this space is yours." First, no one moved. Felt unusual. Corporate spaces were usually filled with charts and presentations, not music. Then, slowly, a woman from the accounting department stepped forward. She admitted she had learned piano as a child but had not played in years. Her hands shook as she sat down. She pressed the first key carefully. The sound echoed through the hall. It was simple, not perfect, but honest. As she played, the tension in the room softened. People who had only known each other through emails and meetings now saw a different side of one another. A side that had nothing to do with deadlines or profits. After she finished, applause filled the room. Not loud or forced, but warm. One by one, others stepped forward. Some played instruments they had brought secretly. Others sang softly. Some shared short stories about loved ones who had inspired them. By the end of the gathering, something had changed within the company itself. People looked at each other differently. There was more patience, more understanding. That evening, as he sat alone in his office, he thought about the journey from that small apartment in his childhood to this tall building overlooking the city. He had once believed that becoming powerful would protect him from pain. But he now understood something deeper. Vulnerability was not weakness. It was connection. A few months later, he received an invitation from the city council. They wanted to honor him for his contributions to community arts and public spaces. A formal ceremony was planned. Speeches were prepared. Media outlets were invited. He considered declining. He had never been comfortable with public praise. But then he thought about his mother. She would have smiled at the idea of music filling public spaces again. She would have been proud not of the money he gave, but of the doors it opened for others. So he accepted. On the day of the ceremony, he stood on a small outdoor stage set up in the same park where one of the first pianos had been installed. Families gathered around. Children sat on the grass. The piano stood nearby, shining softly under the afternoon sun. When it was his turn to speak, he kept his words simple. "I didn't plan to become part of a viral video," he said with a small smile. "I only wanted to remember someone who believed in me when I had nothing." He looked at the crowd, at parents holding children, at teenagers sitting cross-legged on the grass, at older couples leaning on each other. "Music gave me strength when life felt heavy. I hope these pianos give someone else that same strength." After the speeches ended, the ceremony could have finished there. But instead of walking off the stage, he walked toward the piano. The crowd grew quiet. He sat down slowly and placed his hands on the keys. This time he did not play with sadness. He did not play with longing. He played with peace. The melody was warm and hopeful, carried the feeling of acceptance, of gratitude, a quiet joy. Children moved closer. Some adults closed their eyes. The wind moved gently through the trees as the notes filled the park. When he finished, there were tears again, but they were softer this time. Not tears of pain, but tears of understanding. He stood up and stepped back, inviting a child from the crowd to take his place. The child hesitated, then sat down bravely. The music continued. As he walked away from the piano, blending into the crowd once more, he realized that his life had come full circle. He was still a tycoon, still a leader, still responsible for decisions that affected thousands. But he was no longer hiding from the boy he used to be. He had learned that true wealth was not measured by numbers in a bank account. It was measured by moments. Moments of courage. Moments of memory. Moments of connection between strangers in a busy world. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between those piano notes, he felt certain that his mother would have been smiling.